Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Forum Americanum. We're your hosts, Cicero, myself, and friend over here, the younger Gracchi, the great Gracchus.
Gracchus Minor, if you will.
And we're here to chat with you all today about a couple things that we see developing and changing in our great American Republic. Not necessarily for the better, but we're also going to want to talk to you about a number of issues. But today we're going to be focusing on something a little more specific. And Gracchus here wanted to share his thoughts as well before we dove headfirst into this. So take it away, Gracchus.
Thanks. First, I felt it, because being a first episode, I felt it prudent to start with some introductions. Clearly, Gracchus, myself, and partner here, Cicero. And what we're here to do, we're here to have a discussion. We're here to talk about issues. We're here to come together and talk honestly and earnestly about the issues confronting America, on top of other political issues that are important to every human being. But I mean, we're especially focusing on, in relation to the American Republic, the American dream, and the American ideals. But the goal is, to start a conversation and really bring people back together. And that's really the general topic of our first episode here is we're divided, and pretty historically so. Do you have any? Yeah, I think you had some data on that, Cicero, about how divided we are politically at the moment.
Yeah, when we were first just chit-chatting about this, it came to our attention because Gracchus, being a proto-communist of sorts, and myself being more of the free market persuasion, we're talking, and we saw amongst the many problems, probably the biggest was the inability of our fellow citizens just to have conversations with each other and to talk about matters that are actually important and things that we should be trying to figure out a common sense approach to. But instead of having those conversations and trying to work with each other and trying to understand why people feel the way they are, it devolves into basically an emotional blood sport. And that's been very disconcerting to us. And even though we differ on many subjects, we also agree on many, but we differ on quite a few. And for us, it's never something that's hurt or encumbered our friendship. We've been able to have many heated discussions, but we never resort to any type of straw man. Gracchus isn't necessarily a communist, of course, and I'm not necessarily a true free market capitalist in definitely not in the Austrian sense. But we also disagree on many other issues, whether it comes to religion or the place of traditional values, etc., etc. It didn't really matter to us. The point was that we could have these conversations and we wouldn't take it personally, and we wouldn't see each other as some great nebulous threat to the very existence and fabric of the Republic. And that's why we wanted to start these conversations, was to not only lay out some basic info for people and give people basically a crash course into the values and virtues of the Enlightenment and the American Republic, but also to talk about these tough issues. And yeah, we can have a conversation. At the end of the day, we could still go grab a beer and be friends.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I think I kind of dove in too quick of trying to get to the meat of today's episode. Um, yeah, it's important that whether no matter your disagreements, we're still all a little Gil Sappy here. We're still all American citizens at our root. That is the commonality we share. We share this idealism that representative government can work. We all, at our heart, believe this, and that shared belief, should be able to, and has been able to over the past 220 years, be able to overcome simple political differences, and that's, I think, that is the core goal here. Is like you can disagree on all sorts of stuff, but that doesn't make your neighbor your enemy, and that's the important thing I want to get done. Also, yeah, like you said earlier, we're going to talk enlightenment thoughts. We're going to bring maybe help kickstart a second enlightenment, but that's just me being a dreamer there. But really, also try to base some of our thoughts and ideas in kind of political philosophy. So if it does get a little heavy, just bear with us. We'll get through it and get through the philosophical kind of crunch of the matter and get to more practical things every once in a while. Do you have any more introductions there, Cicero?
No, I think we're good. So, this first conversation that we're having is something we were discussing problems we see and things that we see as existential threats to just the very fabric of conversation and political discourse in this country. And it felt like we both kind of inadvertently hit on the same subject over and over, which was partisan politics and how it feels like they're literally ripping people apart. Friends, families. I've seen horrible things over the past 8 years, 8 plus years. Seemed like it started with the President George W. Bush's administration, and started to just go downhill. I'm not going to say the GOP was very blameless in the way they handled the Obama administration, and President Obama, of course, had a lot of issues that I don't agree with him on, but seemed like a good guy and not someone that should be disparaged. And now we're on President Trump, and President Trump has plenty of issues on his own. And but even the things that he does right, we can't even have conversations about because people just label you as a fascist or anything like that. And that's, I mean, the parties are to an extent a reflection of the people, but on the same token, the parties are sprinkling down a message to their supporters, and that, of course, invigorates opposition and frustration and rage to levels that aren't necessarily healthy. So when we were talking about what should our first conversation be, we think we both pretty easily arrived at the conclusion that we need to talk about how partisan politics are bad, why we've been warned against it, like we talk about some of the guys who've warned against it in the past, and give some solutions on things that we think could help tone down commitment to party politics, and especially as part of your overarching identity. It's be a very dangerous course, in my opinion. But well, Gracchus, did you go ahead and start us off with some of your thoughts on figures you see surrounding it, and then we'll go from there.
All right. I kind of want to start with some data, because if we're going to try to espouse some Enlightenment ideals, we got to start with some empirical evidence. So I'm pulling data from the Pew Research Center. They are, no matter what anyone wants to say, a reliable source of data collection of what the population tends to think and what policy matters, and it's reliable. Let's create that as our foundation here. So there's data from a 2016 study. It's a little outdated, but still we haven't really changed at all. We can kind of generally accept that. Is referred to as like a partisan view. So if you're of a Republican party, you're going to view the Democrat in a certain way, or in vice versa. As of 2016, if you're a Democrat, you're 91% unfavorable or very unfavorable view of the Republican Party. Oh, no, it's the other way around. Sorry. Republican attitude towards the Democratic Party, 91% unfavorable or very unfavorable. The Democratic attitude about the Republican Party is 86% unfavorable or very unfavorable. So what we see here is just a clear cut, you're looking at 91% or 86%. This is, they're practically the same number, 5% difference. That's a margin of error. So you're looking at these huge numbers of, you're seeing, if you're part of one group, you're seeing the other group in an unfavorable light. 9 times out of 10. That is what is going on here. And see what else, other data we got going on. Again, I like the Pew Research Center. They had some good data for me. There's been an increase in partisan divide over politics greater than any other issue that is going on in America, between race, religion, education, age, gender. It doesn't matter. Your party affiliation creates a greater divide by 25 percentage points over the last 13 years. This is a 2017 study. You can look it up on their website. But you're looking, so 1994, when they did first start this study, all these ideas, party, race, religion, education, age, gender, approximately the same, between 5 and 15% divide. What we're now looking for is at least a 25% difference between party and the rest. So we're looking at a huge gap in division amongst America, purely based off of party. And that's dangerous. That, in my eyes, is tribalism. I'm going to let Cicero speak a little bit more, because I just rambled on about data for too long. So, but yeah, I'll get back to tribalism. That is my root cause based off the data I see within the population. I think you had some data on our politicians.
Yeah, I think, one of the best things that Greg hit on is we should approach all of these things from a source of data. And if there's not always going to be data to back up claims, but you can use rationalism and logic to try and arrive at the right viewpoint based on circumstantial evidence. But I mean, for the most part, we're going to really try and avoid any type of anecdotal experience to justify a larger mindset. But for us, I mean, these sources are important because they help to quantify and bring this idea and these arguments into a more clear focus. But the data that I was looking at, we'll publish all this in our notes after the podcast. But there are several websites that I encourage everyone who listens to go check on, and we'll publish all of them. But there are really great resources for tracking how your representatives, whether they're Senate members or congressmen, how they're voting, who they're working with. There's also great resources for where they're getting their money from, how are they spending that money, et cetera, et cetera. And I think these are all really valuable for us to keep an eye on, because if we want to be part of a Republican democracy, we have to take responsibility for managing and policing our own representatives. If we don't take responsibility for that, then it just becomes an oligarchy, because they will use whatever means they can to further their own end. But what I want to talk about, there's a website called govtrack.us. It's a great website, has a ton of data on different members of both houses, whether they're broken up by party, etc. And one thing that concerned me, just at a quick glance, I looked over what they call it only goes back to 2016's Congress, which is the current Congress. So it goes back to what they have for the past couple years, and you can definitely dive in further, but this is just what I looked at for this most recent sitting of Congress. And on the Republican side, for the Senate, they have a really great little resources like joining bipartisan bills, which we kind of agreed amongst ourselves would be a fairly strong litmus test of how committed they are to working with the other side, and how open they are to opening to new ideas and being bipartisan. Now, in this category, the Republicans definitely score worse. They only have one senator Susan Collins from Maine, who scores over 50%, joining with Democrats to co-sponsor bills, and that's very unnerving. And it falls off from there down to 40%, and that's Rob Portman from Ohio, and it falls off even further after that. So it's not great. Actually, it's pretty terrible to be frank. The Democrats are better, but not by much. They're mostly driven. It seems in my mind, it's mostly driven by senators who come from more conservative states in the Democratic Party. Number one was not a shock to me. Is Joe Manchin, the one of the senators from West Virginia, and he scored a 66.3%, which is actually pretty impressive for a guy who's willing to be that open. And I followed Senator Manchin for a while now, and I've really come to think of him as a very pragmatic and open-minded guy when it comes to bipartisanship. But the Democrats only have 5 who sit up above 50, and actually all of them come from states that are probably, without fail, much more conservative than the party as a whole, because it's West Virginia, Indiana, North Dakota, Florida, Colorado. Colorado might be the exception to that standard, but still, it falls off quite a bit after that. And I'm gonna just be frank and say that both parties pretty much failed. Less than 6% of the Senate is sitting at bipartisan, a healthy bipartisanship. That's not good, especially when, for all intents and purposes, you need 60% of the Senate to get things done these days, because they don't. Now the threat of filibuster seems ever present. Doesn't matter who's doing anything. There's just always going to be a filibuster, and senators just aren't. I guess they're not willing to sit it out. But that's a pretty grim picture, I suppose. But I mean, you could. I encourage all of you to dive in and look at it yourselves. But that's just one aspect of it, of course. But I think it's a pretty good litmus test of why we feel the way we do. But I think this kind of led me into a new thought when I was reviewing all of this. The scary thing for me is I see the parties as taking a part of people's identities to a level we haven't seen in a long time. We grew up with Democrats and Republicans in the family. We always have some heated conversations over Thanksgiving dinner and things like that, but it was never so much so that people would turn their backs on each other or ignore each other or anything like that. It was just, we could have this conversation, and yeah, sometimes some people get a little upset and a little butthurt, but it always worked itself out in the end. And they never really thought of themselves as a Republican first or a Democrat first. But I definitely see more and more people acting like that is their most important part of their identity and not some afterthought, which is really what it should be. And something that really scared me was there was a recent there was a recent article that came out about a congressional primary, the Democratic Party in Colorado, and it's between a guy named Levi Tillman. He's running against another Democrat named Jason Crow. Now, Jason Crow is widely regarded as the more moderate of the two, more business friendly, etc. And the Democratic Party establishment threw their weight behind Mr. Crow. And Congressman Steny Hoyer, who is the minority whip in the House of Representatives, had a conversation with Mr. Tillman, and it was recorded. Now, I don't really mind that the parties pick their favorites, because that's what any type of organization is going to do. It's going to see the one that it sees or that it thinks is the most likely to win, and is going to put their support behind it. That's completely rational, very reasonable. I don't always like the way it's handled, but I mean, it shouldn't be. There's nothing inherently wrong about that either. But the thing that scared me was there's a recording of the conversation, and Levi Tillman says to Steny Hoyer, "I am a born and raised Democrat." And I brought this up to Gracchus, and I'll let him give his thoughts on it here in just a sec. But that is something that actually really scares me, because I used to hear people describe themselves. I was born and raised a Lutheran, or I was born and raised uh, a Catholic, or I was born and raised uh, in the military, like in a military tradition. There's a lot of different things that people were. Mostly, of course, it seems like religion seems to be the number one thing because it's a pretty important part of people's identities. But the idea of being born and raised in a party and being so committed to it that you make it a fundamental aspect of your identity, to me that screams nascent religion. And religion doesn't necessarily have to be a man in a pointy hat with a staff walking down the aisle of a church. A religion just is something that insists on dogma, and that's why I saw this as most scary. I don't know, Gracchus. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, I yeah. Generally, like anytime you attach yourself to a group identity that strongly, uh, the side effect is you kind of close yourself off from options and ideas, and it's kind of counter to free thinking, in my opinion, because you go, I am this. This is my identity. This is everything in my life. I've attached myself to this group, and that is all I am. It is a strong ideology, and that's what I am. There's nothing that can change that, because this is because of the strong attachment. Kind of repeating myself there, but it's kind of important to emphasize. It's a route to like I alluded to earlier, tribalism. For those of you who don't know, it's kind of it's the base state of human beings. We're attached to a tribe. That is our group. Everyone outside of our group is bad. So it's the in-group, out-group dynamic. And we're seeing this dynamic being attached to political parties or political identities. We're going to talk about political identities. I have issues with identity politics, but we're going to probably touch on that later.
Oh, that's a whole conversation into itself.
Another episode. We're going to deal with that later. But attaching yourself so strongly to a political identity and a political group makes you turn the other identity, the other group, into the enemy. Which, I mean, if you want to look up sources, there's tons of work in anthropology, psychology, sociology, wherever you want to find the research. It is well founded, well established that when you create an enemy, when you create an in-group and an out-group, the out-group becomes the enemy. And we're seeing this a lot right now in politics. Obviously that's the discussion for today, but we're seeing it in politics a lot where you go, oh, this is the enemy for this week. This group is bad. These people are, either, what am I trying to say here? These people, I don't want to pick on one side too much, but these people are fascists or bigots, or these people are, idiots and don't deserve to vote, or whatever is the weekly, enemy. We see the enemy with the media all the time. That's a common punching bag for everyone. But that's the fundamental issue when you get this ingrained identity and ideology, is you end up with tribalism and in-group and out-group. When you should be dealing with that, what you really should be dealing with is the issues of governance, and that's what politics is you are dealing with governing a sovereign state and its citizens, and that's what you needs to be focused on, not turning it into this life or death struggle against the enemy. That's not what it should be, and that's what it is. That's what everything, I guess both my experience and the evidence I see, that's where we are at, not headed. We are there. And this also has some, I guess I'll keep rambling. These have some dangerous consequences as well, because you can so easily fall off the little d democratic foundations of our country and fall into authoritarianism, because you go, this person represents my side. I'm going to, whatever they do, that this is my strong leader for my tribe. Then you go, this individual, represents, and I'm going to get behind them. You end up falling for the strong man, and that's the death of democracy. I mean, you could look at, the Athenian tyrants. You look at that, you go people falling in behind these strongmen. I'm not saying, you support one person strongly, and next week you have, I'm gonna jump there already. Hitler. You don't go there. I was listening to a podcast last week, and David Frum made it quite. I don't know if you're familiar with David Frum. He's okay. If anyone else, he's actually a conservative columnist, writer,
activist.
Yeah, big time. He's a speechwriter for Bush Jr. So he made
call him W.
He made his comment. There's many stops of the train before you get to Hitler Station, which I found pretty potent statement, because both sides love to jump to conclusions and use this, I guess, Hitler fallacy. I guess we'll call it that. Is that fair? Where you don't agree, any slight leanings towards the authoritarian side of the political spectrum, and suddenly that person is Hitler. And that's not true, but there are many stops on the train stops on the way to Hitler Station. I found that kind of a fun little remark. It might have been just a throwaway for him, but I found that pretty interesting analysis of a situation.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's not just. I mean, there's definitely a never Trump movement in the GOP still. I think some of the things he's done has started to win people over, and that's kind of tempered it down. But it's not a matter of winning people over or anything like that. The scary thing is this one-upsmanship when it comes to I'm more Democrat or I'm more Republican than your opponent, because that turns into, well, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it turns into a religious litmus test, right? I mean, let's look at Dianne Feinstein. She's served nearly 5 terms in the Senate, and I don't know about you, Gracchus, but I would not really consider her a centrist. I would definitely place her solidly in the progressive camp.
Yeah, I agree.
And she is, earlier this year when she was at the state convention in California, they were trying to see who would win the nomination from the party, and Kevin De Leon, who's the California State Senate, he's the party leader in the Senate there, really came out hot and heavy against Dianne Feinstein as he's running against her in the primary. And I saw this not only in Mr. De Leon's statements, but also amongst activists and in the social media sphere, screaming that Dianne Feinstein, Senator Feinstein, is not progressive enough, that she's too conservative, that she is not in line with the progressive movement. And I mean, I know we said we wouldn't use anecdotal stuff to justify a larger argument, and I'm not going to, but I'm going to just give one insight into a conversation I had with an old friend of mine, just asking, what about Dianne Feinstein makes her not progressive enough for the position to get reelected as senator, or at least to win the nomination, the Democratic Party? And their response was, actually, I have no idea. The party activists were saying it, and I just assumed it was true. And that's, to me, that's an inquisition. And we've all heard of the Scarlet Letter and the Crucible, and Scarlet Letter is, for anyone who's not familiar, it's a classic American novel about in the days of Puritan New England, a woman is branded by the community and forced to wear a scarlet letter to mark her as an adulteress. And they're using a brand to say, you are not worthy, you, Senator Feinstein, you are below our expectations. It's a religious court as far as I'm concerned. When it comes to the Crucible, it's a witch hunt. And we've seen this in both parties, where with the Tea Party movement, they're rhinos, they're Republicans in name only. Get them out of office because they dare work with the other side. And now we're seeing that same type of movement amongst the Democratic Party. And it's, to me, truly terrifying, because instead of getting people who are pragmatic and willing to work with each other and listen to each other, you find people who are just ideologues. And this, to me, is scary because not only does it drive bad public discourse, but it also drives horrible gridlock, things that should be somewhat easy to fix. And we haven't had a real budget in years. It's just been continuing resolution after continuing resolution because the parties refuse to talk to each other and actually compromise. And it, it it's just indicative of how dangerous this identity has become and how deeply ingrained in people it is. I mean, if you look at primaries, especially since when states are mostly have closed primaries, the people who are motivated to vote in those primaries are going to be the most politically active and probably the most politically extreme on either side, which is why you found a rush of Tea Party supporters voting out, frankly, guys who were very conservative, but they weren't quite conservative enough. And the next guy promised that he was really conservative and that he would show them what a real conservative can do in Washington. And we're just seeing the same thing with the Democrats now. And to me, that's not a good direction to be moving in. It's filtering down through the people and through their conversations.
I completely agree. It's a race towards the fringes. Effectively, you go, I am more conservative, I'm more progressive. Oh wait, no, I am more conservative, my more progressive. Eventually, you have the politicians, the people you're voting for, are racing towards the most fringe elements, and eventually, I don't have an explanation why besides tribalism. The people are following. The people go, oh, my camp is further to the left or further to the right. Better follow them. That kind of idea of, you got to align with the rest of the group, and it's a lot of group, group think and group identity that's chasing out there. And I guess the other point I want to kind of bring up is, our issue with current, like the media, and not the media, like not like news organization, but the media at large, especially social media, is not helping, because the ability for people to select their information and not fact check it is dangerous. The issue of cognitive bias in the populace has probably exacerbated any sort of race to fringe, because if you identify with these party truths, obviously not objective truths, but these party truths, you're going to try to find information that supports your bias towards them. And cognitive bias is a hell of a drug. And social media and any sort of, unfortunately, the internet, while great, is terrible at the same time. Allows for people to just find stuff that supports their own beliefs. And so if you have a strong belief, I'm born and raised a Democrat, to use that quote, you're going to find, unless you go out of your way, you're going to find news and information that supports that belief. You're not going to go and be like, very few people, I'm not going to be an absolutist here, very few people are going to go out of their way and go, I wonder what the counter argument to this is, or is this the whole story, or is there something I'm missing that would change my mind? No, very few people do that. They just want to get something that supports their own viewpoint on the matter. Obviously, I am creating kind of a blanket term, but if it wasn't a significant issue, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, and I think one thing when we're talking about this level of discourse that we're missing out on, I think you hit on a good point. Why they're not considering the other view, but I think even just as important, and something that's probably not thought about very often, is, do people who are party loyalists or ideologues, do they even consider why the other person feels the way they do? Look at the recent debate over gun control after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting, and I'm just going to say this as someone who generally tends towards a conservative position, and I don't agree with a lot of the measures being called up, whether it's arming teachers or anything like that. But I asked a lot of my friends who are in the conservative camp, do you understand why these people want gun control? Because I can understand completely why they do. They want more safety and more security. And the question really shouldn't be about something whether or not it's a matter of the Second Amendment. It should be about what do we value more, liberty or security? Because with liberty will always come a lack of security. But the point I'm making is that on the conservative side, as well as on the liberal side, because on many of my progressive friends who were advocating for a tighter restriction of the Second Amendment didn't bother trying to understand why people felt the other way. I mean, when it came to conservatives, they said, this is how fascism started, this is how communism started, which there is kind of truth, but it's a really bad argument. I mean, the fascists and communists certainly did disarm their own people, but that's a really bad argument. I doubt. Sorry, go ahead.
So that's a bit of a stretch and a straw man. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is, and you're not wrong. But on the other side, the progressive response is, well, they just want to murder babies. They want, the NRA supports domestic terrorism. Also, patently not true, and they're not listening to each other.
Again, playing fallacy police here. That is fallacy via emotion. I can't remember the direct one, but yeah, another fallacy. Okay, carry on.
it's completely unreasonable. You can't. And I tried to strike a middle ground and have a conversation with both these groups. And ironically, I mean, I've used to progressive friends calling me a fascist, which couldn't be further from the truth, considering I believe in a much more limited government. I don't know how I'd be quite a fascist in that, but my conservative friends said that I was a proto-communist of sorts. I was supporting an authoritarian government, even though I never even agreed to support the positions that progressives are taking. I just simply asked the question, do you understand why? And because the narrative is driven by ideology and not empathy, it denigrates into something just useless very quickly. Sorry, I got on a bit of a soapbox there.
I feel bad for interrupting because I was like, I got to play fallacy police.
Nope, don't feel bad. That was it's good to help put that in context.
Yeah, it's a appeal to emotion. It's a think of the children. Think of the children. Yeah, I had to look it up to make sure I was talking about the right one, so I didn't incorrectly claim a fallacy. I mean, it is when you go, think of the children, you want to murder babies. No, that's not a valid argument. It is an argument, but it's not a good one.
Yes.
You have such, I guess, inability to view the other person as another person. You can't. Again, I'm going to just hammer home this root cause of tribalism because this is what I have identified as a major issue. And when you go the other side, you can't empathize with them. That's the point. The point is you can't empathize with the other, and all your thing is it's so easy for people to go, you're a communist, you're a fascist, you're a whatever, without even understanding what they're saying, and that's troubling. That's also troubling because you're just name calling at that point. You're like, well, this is a negative term in our society, so let's use that. And you're effectively falling back on. Again, I guess I like to play fallacy police with everyone. An ad hominem attack. You just call them names because you don't have a good retort for their point. Even if their point is bad, you can still counter it with a good argument, and that's a problem. That's an issue. Is you can't come to the table because the other person is not a human being, and why argue with an animal? That is the roots of it, and I guess. Instead of spending hours and hours complaining on the issue, I think, what would be some solutions to this? Because clearly we can't keep going. Well, I mean, we can. We just shouldn't keep going down the same path. We have to find a solution. And I guess you have any ideas of what would be a good path forward from here? Because clearly we have an issue. We have a problem.
We definitely do have an issue. You're absolutely correct. And I'd say we may have come at this a little disjointed in our pulling stuff together, but I hope you guys take this as it's not a lack of preparedness or anything like that. We've both done a lot of research on this and read all over the place. It's just we're both very passionate about this because it's so frustrating to see people throw aside our shared ideas and our shared values that are enshrined in the Constitution and the Enlightenment for the sake of something political. One thing, and we're going to talk about this in another podcast, the Founding Fathers gave us so much wisdom and so much brilliance. It's actually, if you think about it, they're these men in a backwater colony that just barely had functioning roads. They barely even had the concept of a nation. It was, most people thought of themselves as their colony was their first identity, not as Americans first. And they had so much wisdom. And well, we're going to do an episode on the founding fathers because they're just freaking fantastic, and it's really disheartening to see people just trash them because they don't appreciate the value of their ideas. But I mean, I wanted to just read a quote from George Washington, if I may, um, talking about his feelings on political parties, and I think it's absolutely potent and it's absolutely correct. And this is from his farewell address when he was leaving the presidency, and it's just as viable now as wisdom as it is then. And in Washington's own words, however political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. And I, I mean, I've long been a fan of Washington. He's definitely not the most intellectual of the founding fathers, but he has a lot of pragmatic wisdom and everyday wisdom that some of them don't come across. I remember when I first read his farewell address, this hit me really hard. I used to this actually started my path away from partisanship. I used to be very much what you consider like a zealous Republican. I mean, if I'd kept on the path, I would definitely be in the Tea Party movement these days. But for me, I read this and I thought, gosh, dang, George Washington just laying it on the line and telling us exactly. I mean, I put it up there with people love to praise Dwight Eisenhower's talk and frankness about the military-industrial complex. I'd say this outweighs that even more because the military-industrial complex actually really wouldn't be so much of a thing if the parties weren't so self-interested and driving things for their own ends. And I think we see this now where the parties. I mean, a great example is look at Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders. I definitely don't agree with him on so many issues, but the party was more interested in winning and was actively conspiring against him in favor of Secretary Clinton. And the saddest thing to me was to see people when that came out, instead of being abhorred by it and just outraged, they said, well, Trump has to be beaten at all costs, instead of looking at the corruption of that. But I mean, we want to talk about solutions. I think a great first step is removing yourself from the situation and stop looking at the parties as absolutely correct. Start engaging with people and keep emotion out of it. Like, leave that at the door. Like, listen to what people have to say and try and understand why they feel the way that they do. Don't just assume that people are racist. I mean, there are plenty of people. I myself am multi-ethnic. Definitely don't fit into the collectivized idea of where I should sit politically. But that's because the ideas that have been given to us and the wisdom provided by our ancestors and our forebears, it has just spoke volumes to me. So I think the first step is you got to leave logic out in the front, and you got to leave emotion at the door. Because if you can't do that, that's the first step. If you can't do that, then you have no hope of having a substantive conversation. I mean, for me, that's a first step. I don't know, Rackus, what do you think?
I still think you shouldn't leave emotion at the door. Like, you should bring it in with you, because that's how you help empathize. A little bit of emotion there. I think there's a quote about logic without empathy, and empathy without logic. But I agree. Like, you shouldn't be so emotionally invested. It's kind of funny me being like, oh no, you shouldn't be 100% logical about everything, because in my normal life I am as logical as I possibly can be. Unfortunately, humans are irrational at our core, and we have to throw rationale and reason on top of that, which is important. It's kind of how we got where we are as a species. I honestly, my first step is empathize, but kind of bring back the idea of citizenship, where you should first and foremost be an American citizen. That's who you are. You should not look at the person who has different political ideas as someone else. No, he is one of you. He's your neighbor. He's your friend. He's your fellow citizen. And if you bring in more of an idea of like collective belonging, like you all belong in this great big experiment together, then you bring there's potential other issues here, but you bring a fractured society and you try to mend it with this collective um, collective belonging. You're an American. You are trying to follow these Enlightenment ideas to their furthest, and these ideas of little d democracy, little r republicanism. You want these, you believe representation is the best form of government, and you do that together. It's not some sort of, you disagree of the percent tax. That's not a reason to hate your fellow citizen. That's ridiculous. If you think about it, you again use logic. Use logic there. You go like, okay, you want a 21% tax rate and you want a 35% tax rate, and you're going to hate someone over that? See, that's ridiculous. If you logically look at that, you're like, that is a ridiculous reason not to like someone else. So yeah,
especially over something that's, I mean, frankly, petty.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not even a life or death situation.
Yeah. There's such a bigger overarching goal you could be looking at. There's greater issues within the United States and within the world than just the effectively minor differences that have been blown into major differences because everyone races toward the fringe. If you come together to the middle, everyone probably has more in common than you think. All humans tend to have the same concerns. Food on the table, roof over their head, family's healthy. That's the kind of commonality that's shared everywhere. And you throw on top of that, you're a citizen. Great. Now you have even all these more things in common than you have different. If you look at that, you're going somewhere.
Yeah, and we being a little more stoic is definitely a good idea. And I think, that's probably going to be a recurring theme between us. Is stoicism actually does help mend a lot of these issues. At least a minor adherence to stoicism. Don't be slaved to your emotions was a major thing for them. Being Cicero, I am a bit of a stoic myself. I wrote about it a fair amount. My friend Seneca also did, amongst others. But
Marcus Aurelius, not bad.
Yeah, of course.
Although I am definitely not a stoic, so there's that.
Well, yes, you're not Gracchus. We all know. It's all right. You'll get there someday.
Okay.
But I think a really healthy way to look at this too, that was something that should help to drive a better look at it, is actually look at it how an atheist views religion. An atheist is inherently skeptical of the supernatural claims of religion, as I'm sure Gracchus can attest to, because he's a dirty heretic and an atheist. But that being said, there is value in the skepticism they provide towards the supernatural, and you can easily take that and mend that to a skepticism surrounding these political institutions. Because you should be questioning why the party wants to accomplish what it wants to accomplish. Do not take at face value and say, well, we are doing it for the poor. We are doing it for this or for that. There are maybe ideologues who do, but I would say largely the parties are interested in driving votes. They're not actually interested in providing solutions. They're interested in having the ability to say they're going to do something to drive votes. And I'd say a very good example of this is the first Congress of President Obama's administration. He had a supermajority in the Senate, he had a majority in the House, and of course he had the presidency, all locked up between the Democratic Party. Actually, we haven't seen that level of control over the government in quite some time. Even the current administration can't claim such a level of control. And for all of their talks about things that they would change and all that, they got almost nothing accomplished. And his landmark legislation is, of course, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. But how in 2 years, when you have basically complete control, do you accomplish nothing when you say this is what we're going to, when we get elected, this is what we're going to do? And I think the cynical part of me says it's because they aren't actually interested in doing that. They're interested in maintaining a narrative of driving their own base to vote for them, keep them in power. So I think a skeptic's approach to the reliability and common sense of the party system is a good idea myself. Also, I think there's two other pieces of wisdom that I think are valuable. One is I've heard this said before, and I've heard it from friends of mine, and I think it is brilliant. Definitely wisdom beyond their years. Do not wait to talk. Listen. I think that's absolutely true because listening is such a it's a skill that is in such short supply these days. People aren't listening when they talk to each other; they're just waiting to talk. And if you're doing that, you're not actually having a conversation. You're just trying to reinforce your own argument to yourself. That there's no way that's going to change anything. So, I highly recommend looking at improving your listening skills. And that part of that's comprehension. How you have to understand what they're saying. And if once you get truly good listening skills and truly good comprehension skills, you will understand people so much better, and you'll have much more fulfilling and fruitful conversation than you'd ever imagined. I think the second thing I'd like to impart too is a dear friend of mine when I was in university gave me gave me a little tidbit that I think is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life because it was, I would say, reality shattering or mind shattering because it completely changed my perception of how I interact with the world. I was reading David Hume, who I could not stand at the time. I was voicing my opinion that I hate David Hume. I hate his philosophy. I can't stand it. And my dear friend said, "No, you don't actually hate David Hume. You hate your own inability to argue with him." And that kind of leveled me in a way I'd never been leveled before by just a quick little jibe. And he was absolutely correct. I went back and reread David Hume. I've read him many times since then, and I've always found it much more enjoyable because I focused on listening and comprehending what he's actually saying and then formulating arguments against him. Not necessarily saying that you have to go into it forming an argument, but you don't the point is you don't hate what your opponent is telling you. You hate the fact that you don't have a rational argument against it. And there are cases that comes up. It's sometimes people provide rational evidence and empirical data to justify their position. And instead of saying, okay, well, let me think about that, I need to process this and how would I respond? That's when you start the name calling, and that's when we see the ad hominem and strawman attacks start coming in. But I mean, I think those are two very valuable pieces of advice, and if you take them to heart, I think that would definitely improve your interactions with those around you. Even if they're not willing to do it themselves, you will see more about people and understand their character so much better when you start changing yourself first.
Yeah. Sorry about the interruptions, the boo, but like you can't hate on David Hume.
I don't anymore.
Oh, good.
I love him.
Good.
He's wrong, but I still love the guy.
I will admit, I'm not a great listener. But the fact that I identify that, and I'm trying. I try my hardest all the time to listen, before formulating an idea. Because I mean, yeah, I used to be the worst. I mean, just the worst pretentious, do you think of?
Still pretentious.
I'm still pretentious, yeah. No, but like, you can imagine this kind of straw man of a young, long-haired, like progressive communist atheist that won't listen to you and just has formulated. That's what I used to be. Absolutely, I full on was a stereotype.
He's actually not exaggerating.
I am not exaggerating. I was a stereotype. But then I don't know what happened. Life happens, and I've learned to listen.
You got a paycheck, I think, is what happened.
Yeah, that too. Capitalism's not terrible. Not the best, but it's not terrible. I learned to listen, and I'm going to also double down on the second point. Um, it's good to be able to encounter arguments that you just fundamentally disagree with. That you're like, this is no, I don't agree with anything, but the argument is good. If you're able to like identify that, I think you're on the right path. For me, it was Thomas Aquinas. Um, Everyone not familiar, 13th century philosopher.
If you're not familiar with Aquinas, you should be.
His logic is stellar. I'm going to put it that way. His logic is stellar. Aquinas is great.
We're not talking about transubstantiation because that's a theological point. I think. Are you referring to? Can I take a guess and say you're referring to his argument of the prime mover?
Yeah, the prime mover argument, right? Like, everything has to have a prime mover. And if you can go back far enough, you can go and say, okay, what is the original mover? That line of logic is fantastic. And do I agree with it? No, I don't. But you, at a certain point, one has to admit to themselves if an argument's good and accept that it's a good argument. Even if you disagree, be able to go like, that's fair. That's fair. And that kind of comes from going into a kind of a philosophical world that is estranged from your own viewpoints. Kind of go out there and read it. If you're progressive, go and read an article from the National Review. Do that. Go read something that is well articulated, well formatted, devoid of fallacies, and makes a point that you will fundamentally disagree with. It's going to, I think, expand your thinking, or it will also create your own. If you create a stronger argument for your own point, because if you're standing up on fallacies, you're standing on a weak foundation. God, I'm really playing fallacy cop, aren't I? Yeah, I mean, I agree. Those 2 points is, listen and kind of open your mind to different ideas from your own, especially disagreeing ideas. Those are good ones too. Well, yeah, it's just we have a problem, and there's some solutions for it, and that's about all I got for you.
Yeah, well, I think this is pretty good. I think it's a good conversation we had today, and I really like the fact that you guys listen in. I really appreciate we both really appreciate that any of you would deign to give any of your time to talk to us. And we're excited to be doing this moving forward. I'll be honest, we did record some stuff last year, and I thought we had some good talks. We're not as funny as we think we are. This episode wasn't very humorous, but we'll once we get more into it, we'll probably get more humorous as we move on, at least in our own minds.
Maybe.
But I mean, I apologize. This is not probably as smooth as some of you would like, but we'll settle into a routine as we get back into the swing of things. But we have a lot of stuff. Guys, we have some really cool guests that I think you guys are gonna want to listen in on. I can't make any promises, but I've reached out to several people I know who have all expressed interest in coming on and have this conversation because they see this type of conversation of people who fundamentally disagree on so many things, but agree on so much more, and working to try and find a way we can build those conversations. A lot of people have expressed a lot of interest and happiness over that. And yeah, we're gonna have we might do some interviews, but I think for now we're gonna be focusing on different topics, and letting people who are outside of who aren't Cicero or Gracchus, let them weigh in with us on how they feel about those issues. And yeah, we're really excited to do this. I think Gracchus, you said that your next set you want to start focusing on the freedoms as laid out in the First Amendment.
Yes, that is the goal for the next either episode or series of episodes, because for those of you who are familiar with the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution, they're pretty dense. So I'm looking at the modern applications of specifically the First Amendment. So speech, the press, assembly, and religion. All those, that's a lot of stuff all at once. So we might have to spread it out a little bit, but I think we're going to try to knock speech out on the next one, because it's an issue and it's something that needs to be discussed. And I feel like I think we can have that conversation. And if you guys, like to listen in on that conversation, I would be overjoyed. I would be showing more emotion than I probably would have shown in a long time.
Which is saying a lot.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, guys, for listening. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter, on YouTubes. We are on the YouTubes and the Twitters, and we will also be starting to publish notes and things like that on our website. But everything will be linked below. But please feel free to follow us. Reach out to us. We're going to publish this on different podcast outlets and on YouTube. So please leave comments. Tell us what you love, what you hate. You probably hate us most of all, so we can live with that. But please, we love to interact. We want to get a conversation going, and we can't wait to talk with you guys again. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.